So we're going to have somewhere in the mid-season, we're going to introduce Celebrian as one of the main characters of the first season and of the show in general. Celebrian gives us our opportunity to sort of explore this other side of Galadriel's character in a way that's not anachronistic to the Second Age. So we know that Galadriel, when she was younger, when she was back in Valinor, Tolkien says she was something of an Amazon, right? What he means by this is she liked to ride, she liked to hunt, she liked to fight, and she was really strong-willed and independent. And later on, that strong will and independence goes from her being like this very active, don't want to say like a tomboy, but like she's out with the boys.
Doing traditionally masculine things, yes.
Right. It goes from that to like taking this more sort of queenly role later on, right? And so that's the role that she should basically already be in at this point in time. But having Celebrian being very much the daughter of her mother, right, allows us to kind of explore this Amazonian side.
Hello, Richard Rollin. We are officially starting. We are going to be doing the episode that I have pre-named If I Had $1 Billion, a Tolkien Experts. I'm going to finish the title later.
We'll come up with something clever.
We'll work it out later. But basically, what would you have done if you were given Amazon's $1 billion to make a television production about the Second Age? With 8 episodes? Is it 8 or 10? I think 8. What would you have done? Well, so you take it away, sir.
So let me kind of explain a little bit about my methodology here. Okay. I'm a data scientist by trade, so like one of the things that you always have to show before you show the results and before you show the work you've done and before you show your recommendations is establish and say, here's my methodology. This is how I arrived at these conclusions, so that if you come across something in the conclusions that you wildly disagree with, at least you'll understand my methodology, how I got there, and maybe see how I made that mistake or see that it wasn't a mistake or something like that. So my methodology. The first thing that I try to do is approach this from the perspective of the same perspective that I used when I did my Third Age of Middle-earth campaign, The Darkening of Mirkwood, which was a tabletop role-playing campaign that I ran for about 7 years. And it was set over a 30-year space of time between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Mainly in Wilderland. That was a fun time and place to play because it's very wide open. Tolkien has established like the main beats of what happens during those decades in Wilderland, but there's not really any detail given. So that means that you have these story beats that you can stick to, but then you can feel free to come in and fill out the details yourself and hopefully do them in a way that. So my goal was always to do things in such a way that we're never going to actually alter the story of the Lord of the Rings by our actions, right? So like a story where we kill baby Aragorn or something like that.
It has to make sense in the major debates and whatnot.
So I'm looking for something that doesn't change the events of the Lord of the Rings, but it actually makes the events of the Lord of the Rings much more meaningful, right, for the players. And so just as an example, there are certain things that we know were happening at the same time of the Battle of Pelennor Fields, for instance. There was a massive army of Easterlings and Orcs that was attacking Mirkwood and Dale, right? And so,
and was Galadriel involved in that?
Galadriel was Lothlorien was also being attacked right at the same time. It was like a 3-pronged assault, and the Lord of the Rings only shows you the third, like the southernmost prong of that attack.
Right.
But Lothlorien was also being attacked, and Thranduil's Halls and Dale and the Lonely Mountain, all that stuff, which is all really close to each other, they were being attacked.
Okay.
So, there are a few different texts and stuff in the appendices where this stuff is mentioned. You're told what happened, but you're not really told about the lead up to it, right? If Sauron was aiming to conquer those kingdoms for himself, he would have spent some time laying the groundwork before he attacked. And so that was the campaign that we played, and was dealing with the growing shadow in that region leading up to that invasion. And so then when you come back and you read about King Brand, dying before the gates of the city of Dale and things like this, it means something to you. It means something more to you. That's not just a name now. That's somebody you've spent time with. So
right.
that was the kind of methodology I used when running that campaign. So I tried to do the same thing here. When it comes to the Second Age, I mean, first of all, the Second Age, we're talking about a period of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Right. At least 2,000 years.
At least 1,000 years, okay.
The Second Age is about 3,400 years long. So This is a really long span of time that we have to deal with. And for this long span of time, we have, you could say, an outline of here's what happens on these different years. And then we have vignettes. Mm-hmm. And the vignettes are basically what amount to short stories, sometimes no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs, sometimes quite long, like The Tale of the Mariner's Wife, but basically we had these vignettes that give us stories within the Second Age, right? Mm-hmm. And so we can look at those two things together and then understand, okay, here's how Tolkien established the outline, like the Tale of Years for the Second Age, and then here's how he wove these individual stories into it. And we can use that as a basic pattern for how we add our own vignettes, add our own individual stories, and kind of link them all together through that timeline.
So you're almost looking at what he did and
looking at how he did it and trying
not
to
mimicking, but like is that a fair word?
Mimicking is totally fair. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're looking at the question you're looking at to try to answer is how did Tolkien go about establishing his writing these stories into the outline of the Second Age, that the Second Age sort of came together, right? And then you can say, now there's a model for how I could write my own story and kind of fit it in. Mm-hmm. So that's my methodology. And so what I came up with was an outline for a 6-season show. And I haven't spent an insane amount of time on this, but I've spent a few hours thinking about it and writing an outline for it. And so,
Richard, all my prep was, I'm going to ask Richard what he would have done. That's my prep. So kudos to you.
So the by the nature of these things, the first season is very detailed. Second season is a little bit less detailed. And by the time I get to the 6th season, I just have like a fairly short paragraph.
Okay.
But the 6th season is also like the easiest season to write, because that's when like all the big events are happening. Mm-hmm. Right.
It's almost written for you in a way.
Right. So it's the early seasons when there's a slow build up, the slow return of the shadow, when the good guys are just establishing their kingdoms in Middle Earth, the Numenorians are just getting going, all that stuff. That's the stuff that you could be tempted to say, well, that's boring and people don't want to see it, which is basically the approach that the Rings of Power took.
Why is that? Why do you think that?
Because peace is not interesting. To put a story in front of people, you need to have stories are driven by the conflicts that the characters have. And there can be internal conflicts, like interpersonal drama between the main characters, or external conflicts where you've got, bad guys, good guys, fighting wars, battle scenes, all this stuff. But you have to have conflict and you have to have stakes. Mm-hmm. And the stakes and the conflicts are just really easy and clear towards the end of the Second Age, because Sauron has revealed himself. There's a war with Sauron and the elves, and then war with Sauron and Numenor, and then Numenor wins, and then Sauron gets taken to Numenor, and then he corrupts the kingdom of Numenor, and then Numenor falls, and then Sauron comes back to Middle Earth, and you got the War of the Last Alliance. So that part is easy. The stakes are clear, the conflicts are clear. Earlier on in the Second Age, where a lot of the stuff sort of exists in this really kind of sketchy outline, it's not so clear. That's part of the reason I spent so much time figuring out what would the first couple of seasons look like. So there's the methodology. And then I would say there are 3 other basic premises that I would want you to know before we actually get into the outline. Okay. So the first one is that my approach is this is a show for nerds. I can do this safely because I'm not actually making the show, but I want to make something that appeals to me. So because of that, we're going to put a degree of trust. Put a degree of trust in the audience. Not even so much that they have to know specific lore. We'll try to introduce things as the audience needs to know it. But that these are people who have been trained from years of reading fantasy novels and watching very complex TV, serialized TV shows. And they can keep up with multiple. So I'm expecting people should be able to keep up with multiple characters, with more than a single storyline. I think that Rings of Power introduced too many storylines in the first season. Really tried to do too much. So we're not going to go quite that far, but I expect people to be able to keep up with names, more than one storyline, and to kind of understand that we're going to establish things in the first season that won't pay off till the third season, and that the audience is going to be like clever enough to pay attention to what's going on. So that's assumption number one. Assumption number two is I want to cover all 3,400 years. So that means we're going to have a core cast of elven characters who will,
because they don't change. Yep.
Season, and they will be the ones that will be providing continuity for the audience. From season to season, the cast of mortal characters, specifically humans, to a lesser extent dwarves, but specifically humans, will be changing. And we'll try to do that in a way that is kind of respectful of the audience, and we establish this person is the son or the grandson or whatever of this other character that you liked from the previous season. So we'll try to show that, but we're also going to be okay with the passage of time. That means that people are going to die and new characters are going to come in, but it's this core group of elves that's going to help us establish continuity from season to season.
Okay, so I have a quick question. So regarding the way that you're making it, I don't know if have you watched House of the Dragon? A
little bit of it. Westeros is not my cup of tea, let's just say. But I watched enough to just be familiar with like what they're doing.
Yes.
And I think they were able to basically, it seems like they were able to handle the aging thing more or less just fine. So
that's what is coming to mind for me as you're describing. It's only we have elves to help keep.
Right. And so this will be more extreme because instead of trying to show a character you like has aged 10 years.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, and this season, it's the son of that character you liked from before.
Yeah. I literally just coming off of watching House of the Dragon. It's one of the best ways of handling the passage of time, I'd say. I would say ever seen for lots of decades.
Yeah.
Even with the switching of the characters, they trust you to know who is who. And even if it takes a second, they're like, you'll get it. They kept some of the older characters the same actors, but then the younger ones, they switched them out. They switched the actors out. So, but you're doing that even more so because it's like, we don't have to worry about aging the elves at all, like at all. And so, and then people will be happy because people will get attached to actors. So if we at least have this core group of elves, and then if the people change, then we'll get over it. So I just have to say, having seen the House of the Dragon, I know it works and people liked it, and it does work. So this could work, even though this is just hypothetical, but it's true, it could work. So yay. So please go on.
So my final thing that I would say is that I'm not going to feel totally bound by the restrictions that the producers had, or at least said they had, or at least other people said they had. And what I mean by that is a lot of people who have never actually read the legal text of the agreement that Amazon signed with the Tolkien estate, etc. No, I don't think that's out there, right? So all we have to
you were like, I have done some research and I read it. Okay.
No. But I mean, this is the thing. Lots and lots of people who have no way to actually haven't actually read this have said things like, oh, well, they're only allowed to use what's in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings. They can't use anything else, right? Mm-hmm. And so they would say, well, if you're not happy with this, then it's just because they're so limited to the appendices and it limits what they can do. Well, first of all, that's factually untrue. And we know it's untrue for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons we know it's untrue is because it's not what they did in the show. And so they frequently refer to things from the First Age, show things from the First Age that they don't have rights to if they're only restricted to what's in these appendices, right?
Yep.
On the other hand, there's a bunch right, all this stuff. But on the other hand, a lot of the stuff that's in the appendices, are a lot of stuff that they, so they weren't restricted. They added a bunch of new content, which a lot of it which was kind of supercilious. But then they also incorporated just a bunch of stuff from the Silmarillion. And it turns out they just had an agreement with the Tolkien estate where the Tolkien estate said, hey, if there's something you want to use, you can come to us and ask. So anyway.
What?
Yes. So I am not going to feel like I am necessarily tied to using only the stuff in the appendices. Now, most of the Second Age material is actually in the appendices, especially all the stuff about the kings of Numenor, etc. So I feel like, but I'm also going to make use of the material in the Book of Unfinished Tales. And I'm going to do this because this is my imaginary world in which I have been given $1 billion. And one of the things that I would have used that $1 billion to do would be to go to the Tolkien estate and say, how much do I need to pay you to use material from the Unfinished Tales as part of this show? Maybe not a license to it in perpetuity, but I want to use material from the Book of Unfinished Tales in the show. So going to assume that I did that. And that's also part of the assumption because, again, this is my imaginary universe in which I get to make the show that I want. So those three things said, let's get into it.
Okay. Yes. Oh, I like that we just built it up and now we're get the information. Okay, let's go.
Season one. Season one is about establishing our main characters, showing the sort of good guy kingdoms, the elven kingdoms in Holland and Linden being established, showing kind of the cleanup or the mopping up after the War of Wrath.
Yeah.
We want to establish some problems and threats that will seem minor in this season, but they're going to grow to be a bigger problem later on, and so they're going to pay off later.
Okay.
Our point of view characters for the first season are, for the first half of the season, it's Elros and Elrond. So Elros being Elrond's twin brother who decides to become mortal and becomes the first king of Numenor. So Elros and Elrond.
Are they identical twins? Sorry, I can't recall.
I believe that they are.
So we're going to have to...
Oh, sure. That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know if they're supposed to be identical or not. I'd have to go look. I don't know if Tolkien wrote about that. He probably did, though.
Okay,
because Elrond himself has two sons who are identical twins. So
yes.
Yeah. So Elros and Elrond, and then the second half of the season, Elros will kind of go out of the picture for a little bit, and our new main characters will be Celebrian and Elrond. So Celebrian being Galadriel's daughter.
Yes. Because they end up together, and that makes sense that they would have time together.
Right. And actually, this is one of the little departures that I am going to make from the established canon, as it were, because Tolkien has Celebrian and Elrond not meeting until about the year 1701 of the Second Age, and I'm going to have them meet a few hundred years before that. And I'll explain why in a minute. So I'm more or less keeping pretty strictly to Tolkien's outline, but there are a few little key changes that I'm going to make this a TV show.
Okay.
So our first episode opens with the wedding of Galadriel and Celeborn. This is an interesting detail about that Tolkien tells us, is that they fell in love in Doriath, but that elves don't marry during time of war.
Times of war, yeah.
So they fell in love during Doriath, but it's not until the War of Wrath is over that they actually get married at the beginning of the Second Age. So like this as a...
Can you remind me? So Celeborn, is he one of the Doriath elves? Is he under like Melian and Thingol's rule? Is he one of them?
He's a kinsman of Thingol. I mean, Tolkien originally has him being one of the Teleran elves from Valinor, or like from Tol Eressëa, but Alqualande rather. But he revises that, and the sort of the final version that he really settles on is Celeborn being a member of the court court at Doriath. So he's like a kinsman of Thingol, and
he's never left. So he's always been in Middle Earth,
right?
Okay.
As are the other important Sylvan elves who we will introduce at the wedding, who are going to be like Celeborn's kind of friends and kinsmen, like guys that he went through the war with. Orofir, who is Legolas's grandfather. He's the one that establishes the big elven kingdom in Greenwood the Great, as well as the very first, I have his name written down here somewhere, but the very first, I'll come to it as I read through my outline, but the elf who establishes the elven kingdom in what eventually becomes Lothlorien before Galadriel.
Yes, I do know who you're talking about, because she didn't establish it. She took over
just
kind
of came. Yes. Yeah, right. So like those guys, we're going to sort of show them as Celeborn's close friends or relatives. And the first episode opens actually on the wedding of Galadriel and Celeborn. So it opens there, and then it will also kind of end there. And so we'll establish everything else through like sort of flashbacks through the days leading up to the wedding, things like this.
In my mind's eye, it's so beautiful.
I know, I can see it too. They're sort of standing. The wedding's being held on kind of like this a green cliff overlooking the sea, and the gulls are crying in the distance. So, and of course, this is like the new sea, right? Because the Beleriand has fallen into the ocean.
Right.
And then we establish kind of the backstory for our main characters through a series of flashbacks. And the flashbacks use sort of the frame narrative of a fairly young Elrond and Elros learning about and coming to deal with their family history. And I don't think that I want to give all of this away in the first episode, but I want to tease it out over the course of the whole first season. So that'll be like a running thread with Elrond specifically. As he's growing into his role as lore master, he's trying to sort of like write down the family stories. And this is how we establish some of these flashbacks. And so
are they adults? They're adults, though? Him and his brother?
Young. They're still pretty young at this point. I mean, they were born right at the end of the First Age. So as elves go, or people with elven lifespans go, they're still pretty young. I would probably cast them as kind of teenagers here, or get somebody who to play the role who looks young enough.
Young, but you could maybe change their hair and make them look a little older.
They were a teenager. Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of hair, long, right?
I think so. I mean, I like long-haired elves. I definitely don't want like the silly coif whatever thing was going on in Rings of Power.
The Vidal Sassoon ad.
Oh my gosh! Like, why? Long-haired elves. One of the things that so I haven't really thought a lot about specific casting recommendations other than I would like Elizabeth Debicki to be Galadriel. She is.
I don't know. I need to look her up. Hold on. Like, was she Diana?
Yes. Yes. I'd forgotten that, but yes. Yeah.
Oh, no. She's great. Yeah.
Because
I'll put up a picture. While,
she has. We're talking. I mean, she's a very beautiful woman, but she has the ability in the roles that she plays. First of all, she's quite tall. She's very statuesque.
Yes.
And she has the ability to bring kind of like a lot of gravitas to her roles. She has the ability to portray people who act with sort of great force of character and like portray a lot of strength in the roles that she plays, even as villains. And so I think that she'd be a really solid pick for Galadriel. That's the only immediate casting choice that pops into my mind.
That's perfect. She's also got a look that is, you can make. Remember, you know how like Tilda Swinton can kind of look different in anything.
It's
kind of, and same with Cate Blanchett. Like you can adjust
or even Liv Tyler, right? Who like looks a little weird as a human but looks perfectly normal as an elf, you know? I don't know how else to express that. I mean,
it's an ethereal. There's an ethereal.
There's
and
like
same with even Cate Blanchett. She was 30 when she played Galadriel, and she looks timeless. She looks old, but not old. She actually has the look that is you age. She like needed to almost age into it, and now she still looks like that. She still looks the same. Yeah. So it's the ethereal look with the high cheekbones. And the eyes that just look like
that's sort of like it's just like a very fairy kind of a So anyway, that's the only casting choice that I have in mind. Obviously, the casting of Galadriel would be quite important to me, but it would be fun. I mean, that would be a fun follow up to this outline. Is like cast the main characters. That'd be kind of fun.
I would because I actually didn't. I didn't think about it at all, but I will search.
So we use the flashbacks here in the first few episodes, especially the first episode, the wedding episode, to introduce our main characters and also flashback to things like the kinslaying, the siege of Gondolin, the voyage of Eärendil, the War of Wrath, and very importantly, the theft of the last two Silmarils, which really sets up this idea that like between the Fëanorian aligned Noldor and then the refugees from Gondolin, who Elros and Elrond are actually descended from, like there can just never be peace. And this establishes this idea that, of course, Elrond and Elros were raised by one of the sons of Fëanor. I think Maeglin. I think it's Maeglin. And
the oldest.
No, it's not. It's not Maeglin. It's not.
It's an M.
They're raised by the guy who was
Maedhros?
the poet. No, not Maedhros. Maybe it was Maeglin. Hold on. Maglor. He's raised by
Maglor?
Yeah. Maglor is the son of Fëanor, he's the greatest poet and minstrel of the Noldor.
Oh, okay.
He's kind of the gentlest of the seven sons.
Right, which is probably why he took pity on the boys and didn't slay them.
Yeah. And of course, he's Celebrimbor's uncle, depending on which genealogy you're looking at. But that's also an important detail. So right away, we kind of establish that Elrond has some antipathy or animosity towards Celebrimbor and the other kind of more Fëanorian elves. But also that's softened by the fact that he was basically raised by Maglor for several years, and this is probably where he learned to play the harp. This is where he learned to sing. This is where he begins to grow as a lore master, is under Maglor's tutelage. So we kind of establish these things. We use the wedding as an opportunity to introduce our most important elf characters. We have Oberfir, we have Thranduil is here, and the other kind of Sindarin elves, the refugees from Doriath, right? They are less excited about the idea of yet another Noldoran kingdom. So as Gil-galad is establishing his kingdom, and Celeborn is like on board with that because he's with Galadriel now, they're like, listen, this never goes well for us. We need some distance between ourselves and the Noldor, right?
Because the Noldor are the ones coming in.
Right. Yeah.
And they kind of mess things up.
And also, they're the ones that kind of ruined everything in the First Age, right? So this gives us the opportunity to establish the existing tensions and fractures that still remain among the elven societies. Mm-hmm. And the question that we kind of want to end this first episode with is something like, sure seems like the good guys have a good thing going now, but how long will it last? Can it last, right? And so just to sort of pose that question. And this obviously will also introduce Celebrimbor. I want to use, Tolkien has a few different versions of Celebrimbor, but the version that I like the best for this is Celebrimbor was in love with Galadriel.
Really?
But of course she chose Celeborn.
I didn't know this. Is this in Unfinished Tales?
It's in Unfinished Tales, yeah.
Okay, so I don't remember reading this in the Silmarillion.
And so, because there's a lot of tension between Celebrimbor and Galadriel and Celeborn later on, and all of that makes sense in this sense where he's like kind of a spurned, he was a spurned shooter,
And she chose Celeborn because he was like the better.
Well, she just liked him better for one thing, but I think Celebrimbor was like a little too much like his grandfather, for her comfort.
Who is Feanor, by the way?
Who's Feanor? Yeah. So that's the first episode, is just kind of set all this up. And then we move from there to focus on the choice of Elros and Elrond, right? So about 300 or so is when they get to make this choice. And the second episode I see as being kind of all about these choices. We have Elros and Elrond having to make a choice. Do you want to live as a man or as an elf, right? And they sort of work through this stuff together. And again, this is a great time to establish Elrond sort of like, in my head, he sits down as he's trying to think through all of this, and he opens up this red-bound book and he starts writing in it. And that's the first chapters of what eventually becomes the Silmarillion. But he's writing about the choice of Luthien, and he's writing about Tuor and Idril and Elwing and Erendil and like all his ancestors who have all had to make this choice. And he's trying to figure out which path is the best way to go. And this is a great time early on in the show to establish this sort of question about the mortality of men versus the seeming immortality of the elves, but how the immortality of the elves isn't actually immortal. The elves aren't actually immortal. They die when the world dies. Right. So
which is foretold in, is it the,
well, it's in the Afterbeth, but it's in the Afterbeth, but it's in the, way before that, it's in the, opening chapters of the Silmarillion, right?
Yes.
And so you have this, the music of the Ainulindale, right?
These names.
I know these names.
Richard, the Ainulindale. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, but like the name slipped my mind, if you can believe it. So.
It's okay. They'll probably have
to the best
a lot today. Yep.
Yeah.
So this is I think a good, because this is the big tension that is eventually going to cause Numenor to fall at the end of the show. So we can establish this sort of tension between mortality and immortality, but in a very personal way in Elrond and Elros. Yeah, with these twins, with Elrond and Elros thinking about their past and their ancestors who all made this choice before them, and now they have to make this choice too. Elros chooses to be a man, which is what his father wanted to do, but couldn't. And then Elrond chooses to be with his mother's kindred. But there are other choices in this episode as well. Galadriel refuses the offer to return to Valinor. The Elven realm, the first Elven realm, is established at Lindon in Eriador. There are several choices in this episode and some of them are seemingly paradoxical, right? Elros chooses to remain mortal, but leaves Middle-earth. Elrond and Galadriel, even though they're immortal, they choose to stay in Middle-earth, which is like the most mortal place. Right, exactly. Yeah, whereas Numenor is like as close to the Undying Lands as mortal lands can get. Middle-earth is rapidly changing and corrupting and all these things. And so this establishes this kind of central tension in the episode, which I see as being something like, how does Elrond feel about remaining with the Noldor, some of whom, like Celebrimbor, are related to the people who killed his family, right? And so Elrond, like I said, I see Elrond kind of processing all of this by beginning the composition of what eventually becomes the Silmarillion. The Flight of the Noldor, the Kinslaying. There was like Tolkien has an unfinished epic poem on that. It would be cool to show Elrond just sitting down to write the first few lines of that or something like that towards the end of the episode. And this lays the groundwork for Elrond as the lore master, and also for what eventually becomes the first volume of the Red Book, right? The Red Book being the Silmarillion, the Lord of the Rings, and the Hobbit. Where the stories of the Elder Days are stories that Bilbo collected while he was living in Rivendell, right? But who wrote those stories down for him to collect, right?
Right.
So this kind of establishes that a little bit. Then this moves us into the third episode, which is the migration of the dwarves into Moria. And we are going to establish our primary dwarven characters at this time, and we also show Elrond involved in a really active way in establishing the Elven Kingdom, working really closely with Celeborn, who is his future father-in-law, who at this point, Tolkien says, is a lord of one of the fiefdoms of Lindon. So he stays with Gil-galad. And this brings them into some conflicts with the men of Eriador. Which I
was going to ask if we're going to see men.
Yes.
Like, we haven't really seen...
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we'll see a lot more men when we get to focus on Numenor as well. But a lot of this is I expect the first season to intentionally be a slow burn, but there's going to be some rising action, which we're about to get to.
Okay.
Because there are problems as the elves are trying to establish a kingdom in Eriador. There are problems which are basically the remnants of Morgoth's rule. It wasn't just the elves who fled Beleriand when it sank. There were also nasty things, orcs, trolls, and worse, which fled into Eriador. So there's this very curious thing that happens in The Hobbit, where Bilbo and Gandalf and the dwarves, they kill Gandalf turns these trolls to stone, and then they loot the trolls' lair, and they find
there's a lot of old-timey treasure.
They find treasures from the sack of Gondolin. Right, and this is sort of when Tolkien
That's
actually
first age stuff, right?
Yeah, first age stuff, but also like Sack of Gondolin. I mean that was where Elrond's dad was there.
Yeah,
he was a child at the Sack of Gondolin, right? And so this is like personal family history for Elrond as well. And when Tolkien put that in The Hobbit, he didn't
know.
He did not intend. He was just cannibalizing his older stuff to write this children's story.
Yeah.
And so he was doing it intentionally, but at the same time, like he wasn't intentionally trying to connect the dots for the readers. But this is a place where we get to build upon or even improve upon something and say, well, okay, wait, why are there treasures from the Sack of Gondolin in Eriador, right? And then what are the implications of that? Well, the implications of that are that bad guys from the Sack of Gondolin survived to the end of the First Age and came to Eriador and set up shop there.
Eriador is the area of where the Shire and Bree and all
basically that northwestern Middle Earth. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's where Lindon is, the kingdom of Eregion, the kingdom of the Elvensmiths. It's going to be established there. The Shire is in Eriador. Yeah, so it's just that kind of like that large northwestern region, right? So we know that bad guys from the Siege of Gondolin showed up there. Well, that's a very personal connection for Elrond and for his family. So my idea here is that we have our main villain for season one, our main sort of bad guy for season one is a troll chieftain. And so we know that the leader of the attack on Gondolin was Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, who was slain battling Ecthelion at the fountain during the siege. But Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, we were told elsewhere, had a troll guard, like his personal bodyguard of trolls that like really brutish, really evil, really powerful trolls that followed him. And so my idea is that there's a troll lord who has come here fleeing the destruction of Beleriand and the defeat of Morgoth and all this stuff. And he was formerly the captain of Gothmog's troll guard, and he's now chieftain, and he's sort of gathering trolls and orcs and other critters, monsters, under his banner and trying to sort of establish a kingdom for himself. And that's how you get all this Gondolin loot there in Eriador.
Right, yeah.
Which shows up later in The Hobbit and things like this. But he's the main antagonist and he's introduced pretty early on in the season within the first 2 or 3 episodes. And so with the remainder of the season, we'd have each episode skipping a few years, which is not a big deal because most of our main characters are elves, dwarves, and Numenorians. So nobody's really aging a lot in the first season.
Right.
We have Celebrian born at the end of the first episode or the beginning of the second.
Okay.
And we also see Celeborn. And so we see Celeborn and Galadriel mainly through her eyes as she grows up. Right. And so when she's a young woman, let's say a couple of 100 years old or so, she meets Elrond for the first time. And again, this is a departure from the lore, since according to Tolkien, they don't meet until 1701, after Rivendell has been kind of established.
Yeah.
So this is one of the places where I'm actually going to depart a little bit from Tolkien's timeline. And the reason is I wanted to give, I think Celebrian's a cool character, and it would be nice if there was, I mean, there's really no reason they couldn't have met before this, because, Elrond's certainly kind of around when she's born. And obviously he's a little bit older than her, but you get a little squishy with the timeline a little bit, or at least their relative ages. So it's clear like he's a little bit older, but not in a creepy way. Like he's still, they are of the same generation, if that makes any kind of sense.
For elves, yes. Okay.
Yeah, for elves, yeah. So so they're going to meet, and when they first meet, we're going to see that there are sparks between them, but nothing like a romance developing yet. And Celebrian gives us our opportunity, right, to sort of explore this other side of Galadriel's character in a way that's not anachronistic to the Second Age. So we know that Galadriel, when she was younger, when she was back in Valinor, Tolkien says she was something of an Amazon, right, which is a humorous choice of words in retrospect. But what he means by this is she liked to ride, she liked to hunt, she liked to fight. And she was really strong-willed and independent. And later on, that strong will and independence goes from her being like this very active, don't want to say like a tomboy, but like she's out with the boys.
Doing traditionally masculine things, yes.
Right. It goes from that to like taking this more sort of queenly role later on, right? And so that's the role that she should basically already be in at this point in time. And I think the deciding factor there is probably the time that she spent with Melian in Doriath would have given her this other perspective and kind of matured her and rounded her out after she came to Middle-earth. And also that's where she accumulates a lot of her wisdom. But having Celebrian, right, being very much the daughter of her mother, right, allows us to kind of explore this Amazonian side. She's stubborn. She's strong of will. She'd rather be out hunting. She wants to learn how to fight, all these different things. And this gives us the chance to kind of explore her early relationship with Elrond before they're a couple, let's say, where through her friendship with Elrond and his wisdom, the wisdom that he has accumulated from the tragedy that he's lived through. Like Celebrian was born after all the bad stuff happened, right? And so she's, I think part of her character is kind of like, oh, I wish I'd been around, for the war.
Yeah, because that could be us, because
like
we're just coming in.
Right,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
And Elrond, who has, he's not as old or as storied as Galadriel, but he's certainly been through some stuff, right?
He has seen what she has seen.
Yes. In fact, he has. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So because of the things he's been through, he's got a little more wisdom, and so their relationship is one where she's sort of bringing this kind of life and vigor into his life, which otherwise he's very sort of past looking, like very focused on the past. And then on the flip side, he's kind of rounding her out and slowly drawing out the more queenly side of her nature. So the central action of the first season, if you could say like the main antagonist of the first season, is this troll captain of Gothmog's troll guard.
He's a minor bad guy, but
he's a minor bad guy.
One.
The main bad guy in the first season, right?
Yes.
So there's going to be some back and forth there throughout the season, and the idea is this eventually culminates in her being, in my head, maybe like in an act of rebellion or defiance or something like that. She's out riding where she shouldn't be riding, kind of a thing. She gets captured and taken by the troll chieftain or by his minions. So Elrond and his friends, and here we can introduce the counselors who live at Rivendell at the end of the Third Age, guys like Eristor and we could even bring in, what's his name? That really great elf that Frodo meets at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Glorfindel?
No. It's before he meets Glorfindel.
Is he? Are they in the Shire and they're kind of passing through?
Yes.
Oh, I don't remember that guy's name, but I mean...
I told you we're going to do a lot of this today. Listen, guys, we're recording this during the week after Christmas, and my brain is just in a party haze right now. So
happens to the best of us. I think I said that already.
Yeah. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, so we could like get that guy in, and just like some other cool elves that show up later in Lord of the Rings, which would be nice Easter eggs for people. And so, they ride to her rescue, and even, like a young Thranduil could be involved, things like this. And we can give the warrior princess her day. Like Celebrian doesn't have to be totally helpless in this either, But I think that I would want to focus more on, as opposed to just being like a big action sequence like you got in the Hobbit films or something like that, like really focus on the sense of like darkness and dread and claustrophobia as they go into the troll captain's lair, try to bring her out. Maybe they, in the process, they find not all, obviously, but some of the missing treasures from Gondolin. And there's this really kind of, this is one of the things that I would want to build up, is this tension between Elrond and this troll chief as he realizes, hey, this is the guy that killed my family, like my great grandfather, and things like this. So there's just a there's a lot of personal stakes for Elrond when they go in, much more like Moria in the Fellowship of the Ring than like Goblin Town and The Hobbit or something like that. Not just an action sequence for action's sake, or like the fight with the snow troll at the beginning of Rings of Power. Not just action for action's sake, but actually it's
driving the story.
Yeah, well, not driving the story, but also just really focusing on the mood, right? The claustrophobia, the fear, the terror, like you're going into a dark place that's literally full of demons, right? And you're going in there to deal with something that somebody should have already dealt with. You're going there to rescue someone you care about, all these different things, right? And to me, that's like a really primordial story. It shouldn't just be a throwaway. So, so that would be like the big, culminating action sequence of the first season. And then at the end of the first season, we get and there's also foreshadowing in here, because Celebrian as a character, she, much later on in the Third Age, she gets captured by orcs while she's crossing the Misty Mountains, and she's tortured by them. And eventually the Rangers and Eladon and Elrohir and Elrond, they ride to her rescue, and they rescue her, and Elrond heals her, but her spirit is broken, and it's so broken she sails over the sea. This happens before the events of the Lord of the Rings, but it's why Eladon and Elrohir hate orcs so much and hunt them with vengeance ever after. So we can also kind of set up this idea that Celebrian has this sort of habit of going places she shouldn't go, and sometimes it gets her into a bit of trouble. Anyway, so I think this sort of solves the Galadriel problem that they had in the Rings of Power, because it gives us somebody who's very much like Galadriel, like so much like her that she could be your daughter, right? Because she is. But also she's younger and greener and less experienced, but you still have... It makes
more sense to have a sort of sense of wanton adventure. Yeah.
Yes. But you also have Galadriel as she's supposed to be in the Second Age, which is, proud, regal, queen-like.
Mother.
A mother, a queen, desires to have her own realm to rule, but also, a very good person. So then the teasers at the end of the first season, as we kind of wrap up the first season, we'd have the troll chieftain slain, but the audience is shown that there's this tattered banner with a red eye hanging in his lair. And the characters don't know what this is, but obviously the audience knows. This is a little hint, that he was under orders, that Sauron will eventually return. We can establish a sort of budding relationship between Celebrian and Elrond, something that's eventually going to grow into romance. And we see Gil-galad's growing interest in the young Elrond, who he sees as a very sort of promising person. Celebrimbor's bitterness grows at being spurned by Galadriel, at being overshadowed. I expect a little bit of elven politics, not the cringy way they did it in Rings of Power, but just as he's overshadowed by Celeborn at Gil-galad's court. And
we'll see some of the court. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
where he sees because he sees Celeborn as his rival for the Hand of Galadriel, and now his rival for favor with the High King. And this foreshadows the fact that in a few centuries, which is not much time for these elves, but in a few centuries, he's going to go found his own kingdom in Eregion. And part of the reason is to actually get out of the shadow of Galadriel and Celeborn. And then finally, we show Orofir Amdir. That's the name of the elf we couldn't think of earlier, the one that goes to what eventually becomes Lothlorien, and founds a kingdom. We show Orofir Amdir Thranduil, who maybe had already ridden with Elrond in pursuit of the trolls and orcs. We show them crossing the Misty Mountains, and it's like one of the last shots of season 1 would be showing them crossing the Misty Mountains as Greenwood the Great and the Anduin, and on the other side Lothlorien, stretch out beneath them. Because my thought is that their establishing of the Sylvan kingdoms there in Greenwood the Great and in Lothlorien will be an important plot thread for season 2.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding Thranduil, I'm a little bit confused because you guys have said how he's basically Thingol.
Yes.
So I just wanted to figure that out before
at the time that Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, Thranduil was just Thingol, again, because he was just ripping stuff out of the Silmarillion and putting it into The Hobbit. But then later on, Tolkien goes back, and this is part of the Book of Unfinished Tales. He goes back and tries to figure out, well, who is Thranduil in the history of the Silmarillion and everything. And so he has him the son of Orophyr being another one of these elves at the court of Thingol, like Celeborn, another kinsman of King Thingol, who came to Middle-earth. And Orophyr is very proud and very, as most of these elves are apparently, but he's very proud and he doesn't want to be part of a Noldoran kingdom. He sort of blames the Noldor for the ruin of Doriath and all that, the sons of Feanor and all that stuff. So he goes over the mountains with his son Thranduil and with Amdir, who's another one of his kinsmen, and they found the great Sylvan and they meet the Sylvan elves there, the ones who had never crossed the Misty Mountains, who obeyed the summons of the Valar and then stopped along the way and decided just to stay, and they never crossed the Misty Mountains. So they find them, that they're sort of kinfolk, long estranged, and kind of adopted their ways and found these kingdoms, and those are the elves of Mirkwood and the elves of Lorien that you meet in the Third Age. Okay. But that's the origin of those kingdoms.
Okay. So but so he isn't. So Thranduil holds the place of Thingol, basically, as opposed to being him.
When Tolkien is writing The Hobbit, because remember, when he was writing The Hobbit, he didn't originally intend The Hobbit to be part of the. There was no legendarium. He was just like ripping and pasting, like strip mining his old stuff that he never thought would be published, to do this children's story. Okay. But then later he goes back and he rationalizes this. So it goes from being just like, I copied my character from before, to now there's a pattern, and the pattern is you have Elf King who comes to forest, establishes underground palace, etc. Right.
Oh, the pattern. I see the pattern. It's all about the pattern. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, we can move on now. Okay. I just wanted to.
That's okay.
Do an aside here. So
that's like a fairly detailed outline of how I see season 1 playing out. The next few seasons really just have some high level notes for these, because obviously if I were to sit down and start writing scripts, lots of things would change. So like the farther you get out, the less sense it makes to try to outline things at an incredible level of detail. But I would like we began season 1 with a wedding, so let's begin season 2 with a funeral. Okay. So we start season 2 on the island of Numenor, and it's the funeral of King Elros Tar Miniatur. And of course, Elros's oldest son was already like 381 years old when Elros died. And so like already too old to be king. So he takes the scepter and then immediately abdicates and gives it to his son. So we kind of show all that out. And again, it's a way to revisit this choice. Elros chose mortality. And what's really interesting is that Tolkien has some notes. I think this is in The Nature of Middle-earth. He has some notes at one point where he says, well, Arwen, Elladan, and Elrohir are the sons of the children of Elrond. So they get to make the same choice he makes. That's why Arwen gets to make the choice of Luthien, right? Yes. And so he says, well, wouldn't Elros's kids also have gotten to make the same choice? So Elros has, I think, 4 children. We don't really know anything about the younger 3, but he does have in his notes that possibly they also had to make this choice. So I think that would be cool to show. I think that would be, again, this theme of like mortality and how the Numenorians accept it at first, and then later on go on to reject it and to sort of curse the choice of their ancestors. Yes. That's a really important theme for the fall of Numenor, which the Rings of Power did absolutely nothing with. And so so I want to kind of bring that out here and spend some time on that.
Okay. So this is the Numenor year. We're going to get to...
a little bit. The big season 3 is going to be the big Numenor season. And then for like our focus will gradually shift to Numenor as the show goes on. Okay. But this also kind of establishes, hey, those guys that went away to Numenor, and that last we saw Elros, he was establishing his kingdom. Well, now the kingdom is established and it's beautiful and it's great. It's all these things, and now he's dying. Okay. And I think that in my mind's eye, I can see Elrond sort of sensing that his twin has finally died, right? Having chosen the mortal life desired by their father. And I think that maybe he also struggles with his own choice, which can't really be revoked at this point. His own choice to be counted among the kindred of the elves. And so grappling with these questions leads him to begin composing like the next part of the Silmarillion. So this is another way for us to show him developing as lore master and growing in wisdom, and also, again, do some flashbacks to first AG kind of stuff, even if it's like a little shadowy. and not totally explicit. And in the meantime, Orophyr and his son Thranduil, we spent some time showing them in season 2, showing them establishing their elven realm in Greenwood the Great, Amdir, and Lothlorien. But they find themselves dealing with various issues from the get-go. Sauron, at this point, has returned to Middle-earth and reestablished himself in the Far East. He hasn't come to Mordor yet, but he's reestablished himself in the East. And the Greenwood specifically is like first target on his radar, right? Because eventually he takes the elven capital in Mirkwood and turns it into Dol Guldur, and the Mirkwood elves remove far north to get away from it. And so Greenwood starts to become inundated with creatures on the vanguard of Sauron's growing reestablished kingdom. The first Numenorian voyages to Middle Earth begin at this time, and we meet Veantur. Veantur is the first great Numenorian mariner. And then Aldarion. Aldarion is the great mariner king of Numenor, who's going to be one of the main characters in season 3. So we introduce them as main characters here in towards the second half of season 2. And then we also see tensions building up in Lindon. And ultimately there's a fracture, and Celebrimbor leaves with the other more Fëanorian aligned elves and founds the kingdom of Eregion, the kingdom of the Elfsmiths. They establish close friendships with dwarves. That is a thing I really liked from Rings of Power, except that it wasn't Elrond who did it. It was Celebrimbor. So we show Celebrimbor establishing a relationship with dwarves. This is the time when Mithril is discovered, all this stuff. And in this season...
And Mithril is just plain Mithril. It's
Mithril. I mean, Mithril is special enough without being... like
extra super special.
Oh my gosh, like elven battery juice or whatever, right? Yeah. And then we also see Gil-galad and Elrond. They become increasingly concerned with the growing darkness in Middle Earth. So again, the shadow is here, and I think we'd have again some other like little bosses or whatever, being dealt with in Mirkwood, being dealt with probably on the northern borders of Eriador, where there's up where the snow and ice is. That's where the bad stuff goes to hang out. So they're still dealing with this stuff, but also becoming increasingly concerned about the way that the shadow is falling upon the elves again, right? And we know this, because they send a letter back. Gil-galad sends a letter back to the kings of Numenor right at this time, and this is in Book of Unfinished Tales, laying out his concerns. So we can just take that letter and use it as take that and just use it kind of as a template for this is when we see things start to get bad. But they still don't fully understand why things are getting bad. What is getting bad?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's season 2, just a high level outline. Season 3.
So before you move on, I just wanted to say I like the writing of the Silmarillion by Elrond. I like that being inserted, even if you didn't mean it to be this way. I know that was one of the problems with Rings of Power, is that they're like doing nods more to the Jackson films than to the actual lore. But this is both. I like it because that's what Jackson did quite a bit, especially in the beginnings and the ends of his trilogy of Bilbo writing, Frodo writing, and then Sam, the last pages are for you. I like that, having the story being present.
Yeah,
I think the literal book. Yeah.
For it to be a Tolkien story at all, you have to have that sort of like that custody of the manuscript, right? Which makes it all the way to Sam,
So yeah, I like that. I really, I like, of course, other things, but that particularly, cool. I think that's a nice touch. But yeah. Season 3.
Season 3, the main narrative tension for season 3, this is maybe our most Numenor-focused season. Okay. So the main narrative tension for the season is a story of Aldarion and Erendis, or the story also called the story of the Mariner's Wife. This is in the Book of Unfinished Tales. It is one of the most beautiful and sad and frustrating stories that Tolkien ever wrote.
I don't know that one.
I'm not going to summarize it here for you,
but
basically Aldarion is he's the first great mariner king of Numenor, and he has a very strained relationship with his wife Erendis, which ultimately is the reason, and their inability to ultimately kind of come together and forgive each other and sort of meet each other on each other's terms is the initial cause of the fracture that begins in Numenorian civilization. So but it's also during Eldarian's time that the Numenorians first start to work to oppose Sauron in Middle Earth. So he's a hugely important character. Their love story, and then when it all goes sour, I mean, like, that's a show. That's a whole season.
Okay.
That could be probably 6 seasons or whatever. Like, that's a whole show. That's like, I mean, it's like high romance and drama and all this stuff. So that's the main focus of the season. And then we also have, with the help of Elrond, Galadriel and Celeborn reconcile with Celebrimbor. And Galadriel, at least temporarily, and Galadriel asks Celebrimbor to remake the Elfstone of Idril for her. So this is something that Tolkien writes about in the book of Unfinished Tales. It's this really interesting little detail. And so Idril Celebrindil, so Tuor's wife, Eärendil's mother, she had this Elfstone that had been created in Aman, in the Blessed Realm, and is this green gem that had an effect very similar to the effect that the Silmarils had, the way that it had light in itself, but instead of having the light of the trees in itself, it had the light of the sun within it. And if you carried the Elfstone, you could heal things with a touch, and where the Elfstone was, things grew, things were prosperous, things were blessed, etc. So it's kind of like a miniature Silmaril, but also kind of has the effect that the Elven rings are supposed to have later. And Galadriel becomes concerned. This is all in Tolkien. Galadriel becomes concerned about the fading of Middle Earth and the darkness that's falling, the shadow that's falling, and she wants something that will help her to be able to heal and to restore. And so she asks Celebrimbor to remake the Elfstone, or to make a new one, and he makes one that is, as said, more subtle and more beautiful, but not quite as powerful as the original, and because the light of the sun isn't quite as strong as it once was, and gives it to her, and they have this kind of, in the book of Unfinished Tales, this kind of this sad but beautiful exchange, where he says, I would have done so much more for you, but your heart was given to Celeborn of the Wood and all this stuff. So it's a little, it's a little bittersweet. But this is the Elfstone that eventually she gives to Celebrian, and that Celebrian gives to Arwen, and that Arwen gives to Aragorn, which is why Aragorn's his like elven name, high name, is Elisar, right? The Elfstone. So anyway, so this sets up some nice foreshadowing of the Lord of the Rings, and it sort of shows us Celebrimbor and Galadriel for a time reconciled, and we're told that when Galadriel has the Elfstone, that it brings healing and joy to those around her, and this is the impetus for her and Celeborn being invited by the Elven Smiths of Eregion to actually come and live there and rule, which they do. So it seems like things are getting a little bit better, right? But also we've now set the stage for the coming of Anatar, for the coming of Sauron. So this season's big bad is another servant of Sauron. This time it is an Easterling captain who maybe eventually ends up as one of the Nazgul, or sort of just foreshadows the idea of the Nazgul, these dark servants of Sauron who are human men who serve him in exchange for sorcerous powers and long life and all of these things. And he is creating problems. He's beginning to try to corrupt the men of Rovanion, the guys who are going to be the ultimate ancestors of the Rohirrim. And tries to corrupt them in order to create problems for these new elven kingdoms in Lorinand and in the Greenwood. And so Thranduil I see as being kind of the main character of the Sylvan part of the story arc. And he marries, probably in this season, he marries his Sylvan wife. Maybe Legolas is born in this season, maybe not. There's zero indication about how, well, there's no helpful indication about how old Legolas is supposed to be by the time of The Lord of the Rings, but he's probably born sometime in the Second Age. So season 4 is our craft.
3's
goats.
done? We have the big bad named, and we have the main plot.
We got a big bad named. We have basically 3 main plots, right? Numenor, the stuff going on in the Elven kingdoms, and those two are very closely related. So basically the stuff going on in the Elven kingdoms, that's the plot that overlaps with Numenor, and it overlaps with the Sylvan kingdoms. So it's So basically, that's where you get your overlap.
Okay.
So season 4, Anatar comes, right?
Yes.
This is we see Numenorian power growing in Middle Earth, almost in a kind of a concerning way. The Numenorians are getting wealthier, and as a result, more proud and maybe even a little cruel. But this is our crap goes down season. Like this is when, like the previous season, things were kind of building up, but it seemed like we might be hitting the stable point. And then season 4, the volcano, I guess, literally erupts. Not in a dumb way.
But not in that way. Yeah, exactly.
But so this is the crap goes down season. Anatar comes. He's rejected by, I mean, just following the book here. Anatar comes. He's rejected by Galadriel and Celeborn. Well, he goes to Gil-galad first, and Gil-galad and Elrond are like, I don't think so. And then he goes to Eregion, and Galadriel and Celeborn initially reject him. But he incites Celebrimbor and the other Elven Smiths to actually revolt against Galadriel.
So that's interesting.
That also
Let me
happens,
see that.
It's all in the unfinished. It's all in the books.
Yeah.
And so, Galadriel and Celeborn. So you have the forging of the Rings of Power. Celebrimbor is tricked into rebelling against Galadriel while Celeborn is away. And so Galadriel,
I like that, yeah.
Galadriel and Celebrian escape with the help of the dwarves of Moria.
I was going to say, did they go and live with them or just escape through Moria?
They passed through Moria with them.
Okay.
So they passed through Khazad-dûm and they come out the other side into Lothlorien, and that's the first time they come to Lorien.
And see, look at all these names we recognize. Like
this is all just in the books.
This would be great. We'd be like, oh, we know that. Us, and the more normie folk would be like, oh, I know from Lord of the Rings that name. You know.
Yeah. And so the Barad-dûr is built. The One is forged. Sauron openly proclaims himself. Celebrimbor realizes his mistake, but too late. And the war.
So wait. Does Anatar? Doesn't he go to Numenor, or am I skipping ahead?
You're skipping ahead.
Sorry, my bad. Okay. Rewind.
So the Barad-dûr is built, the One is forged, Sauron openly proclaims himself, Celebrimbor realizes his mistake, but it's too late. He hides the three, and then right before the siege of Eregion begins. So the siege of Eregion is the beginning of what is called the War of Sauron and the Elves. And this is actually a prelude to when Sauron goes to Numenor and the War of the Last Alliance and all this stuff. And so we have the Siege of Eregion. This is where you want your pitched battle set pieces. This is that season. We get the Siege of Eregion. It's super dope. We get Celeborn and Elrond. They lead the only Celebrimbor is killed. Celeborn and Elrond lead the only survivors away from the siege, and they escape Sauron's armies by finding this hidden dell that eventually becomes Rivendell, Imladris.
Okay. Oh, okay.
They're about to be, and then this is a little something I added. They're about to be overwhelmed when they are saved by the timely arrival of
the Eagles.
No, not the Eagles. Of some of Círdan's elves from the Havens, but led by Glorfindel, who is this hero from the First Age who returns right at this moment to help the elves.
Okay.
He's sort of like the first vanguard of the Astari. Even in some versions, Tolkien has him accompanied by the two blue wizards.
Okay.
Might or might not go there. I think I would almost not go there just to not muddy the waters too much. But Glorfindel shows up, and of course for Elrond, this is like hey, you knew my dad. Kind of a again, this is all a lot of these characters and everything all go back to Gondolin. So there's this connection. And so at this point, though, things are getting dark. Khazad-dûm closes its doors. Celebrian and Galadriel cross back into Eriador, looking for Celeborn. And this is where they meet up finally again at Imladris at Rivendell. And Celebrian.
Elrond's there. Okay.
Yeah, Elrond's there.
Okay.
And Elrond is there, and he's looking around. And he's thinking, you know what? This would be a great place to establish a refuge. And this is when Galadriel and Celebrian show up, and Celebrian and Elrond meet again. And this is actually their first meeting in the books, right? But they meet again, and this is when Elrond kind of looks at her and then really looks at her. And this is when they profess their love to each other. They don't get married at this point because elves don't marry in times of war.
Right.
But this is when they profess love to each other. And then and so we've got the War of the Elves and Sauron, and this continues to play out. And we end on sort of a cliffhanger for this season, which is big set piece battle Gil-galad and Círdan's armies, along with the survivors of Eregion, against the forces of Sauron. And just as the elves are about to be overwhelmed, you hear a trumpet sound, and you see the Numenorian banners cresting the hill, and that's the end of season 4.
Oh, I actually just like, and
yes,
like I am captivated because this is the season. I can even see it. People will be in this hypothetical. People would be like,
alternate universe. Yeah.
Yes, at the end of season 3, they would be like, okay, I just really want a battle, but like, I guess we'll see. Like, they're like, it wasn't bad, it was good, It just felt like so much setup, this is not a bad thing, but you're like, oh, but there's payoffs, I promise. And then season 4, they'll be like, the payoffs, so many.
Is like everything coming together. And the great thing, though, is that if we do it this way, but with a slow build, the arrival of the Numenorians in Middle-earth does not feel contrived or forced. Mm-hmm. Because we've been already dealing with the Numenorians, like their increasing presence in Middle-earth. Mm-hmm. They're aware of the threat of Sauron. We've spent all this time on Aldarion. The whole reason Aldarion is doing all the things he's doing is because he knows that Sauron is going to be a threat again, and he's trying to prepare for war. He's trying to get Numenor ready. Yeah. And so when they show up, they rescue Gil-galad's army.
And they're believable that they are so advanced as well.
Yes, right, 100%.
Now, you've established that in the previous seasons.
And this isn't even the big showdown between Numenor and Sauron. That's still to come. But so season 5, we do a big old time jump, a few hundred years. And what we try to establish in the early episodes of season 5 is the way in which Sauron has been specifically targeting and corrupting the Numenorians, even before he gets captured by them. Mm-hmm. Because he hates them and he fears them and he's very jealous of them now. And this is where we see the distinction between the king's men and the faithful starting to arise. And also, this is where the Nazgul first appear. And so the Nazgul are our big bads for season 5. Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff going on here. There are different Nazgul that are involved at different places. The Witch King of Angmar can already be trying to set up shop in northern Eriador. You can have Khamul and the others that are in the Dol Guldur area, specifically targeting the Sylvan kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And so now we see Sauron using his most feared and dreadful servants to wage kind of a war on all fronts. But it's like a slow war of attrition as he tries to rebuild his forces after being defeated by the Numenorians. And in the meantime, you could spend nearly an entire season just on the political intrigue going on in Numenor that results in the rise of Ar-Pharazôn. So this is our, it's a very, let's say, Game of Thronesy kind of season in that there's going to be battles, there's going to be a lot of tension, there's going to be a lot of political drama as things kind of rise to this fever pitch. This is also near the end of the second half of the season. This is when we introduce Elendil and his sons as the leaders of the faithful and as the sort of the main characters of going forward. Okay. And basically this season would end. A couple of things would happen. You'd get probably the mid-season finale would be Ar-Pharazôn's army showing up, attacking Sauron in Middle-earth. And his army is so large and so impressive and so advanced at this point that not a single arrow is shot, not a single sword is drawn. Sauron's army lays down their weapons, runs from the field, and Sauron has no choice. Even as powerful as he is, even with the One Ring, he has no choice but to come and grovel before Ar-Pharazôn.
That scale, like that,
can't even imagine, right? But
that is such. But we know him in the Third Age and how powerful he is.
Yeah. And this should really emphasize for the viewers. It should really emphasize just how powerful Ar-Pharazôn has become at this point. That even Sauron, as powerful as we've seen Sauron all throughout the show, even Sauron has no choice but to come and bow before him.
And he battled. Yeah. He even battled the elves.
Yeah.
So it is showing like this. No wonder the hubris is growing.
Right.
When they're like,
right, exactly.
Look at us. Sauron bowed to us. And he even was fine to fight the elves.
And this is why you have this.
Why don't we have immortality? Sorry.
Right. No, exactly, because we've been returning to this sort of recurring leitmotif throughout the show of the choice of Elros and his children, and that they chose mortality. They chose the mortal life. They are what they are now, and so we can see like growing resentment that as the Numenorians become more powerful, they start saying, well, why shouldn't we have this for ourselves?
We're just
right?
as good as the elves.
Right.
Why aren't we?
We're better than the elves. Like
Yeah.
we're getting more done. We're accomplishing more. And so so the mid-season finale would probably be that, and then the second half of season 5 would be the corruption of Numenor as Sauron gets there, becomes Ar-Pharazôn's advisor, and tricks him into basically worshiping Morgoth, and of ultimately sailing on the Undying Lands.
Mm-hmm.
And the season finale for season 5 would be the Great Fleet sailing for the Undying Lands and the downfall of Numenor.
Okay.
And I would want this is the one in which I would want to get like the most. This is the season in which I would want to get like the most apocalyptic and the most mystical, especially with some of our characters. I would love to see Elendil portrayed as something of a prophet. Right.
Okay.
So like the last good king, Tar Palantir, right? Palantir means the far seer, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea that he's prophetic, he has a vision, things like this, and that Elendil has sort of is drawing on some of that, you could say.
Is Elendil related to the kings?
Tar Palantir, yeah, I mean he's related to the kings through the lords of Andúnië,
okay,
which is like the western part of Numenor.
Okay.
And they're basically they're a scion of the royal family, but he's not by right king of Numenor or something like that. But
yeah,
they're a scion of the royal family.
They're kin.
And yeah, they're kin. And he's so I would like to sort of see him, and I'm getting this from The Lost Road, which is this unfinished sort of time travel story that Tolkien wrote. And this is where the character of Elendil actually first shows up.
Okay.
Amandil and Amandil, his father, and then Elendil. This is where those characters actually first show up. For people who don't know, it's an awesome story. It's in the history of Middle Earth. It's about this father and son pair who like dream their way back through time into all these other father and son pairs, all the way back.
Oh, that's super
through like
creative.
through European history. And then ultimately, and basically all the father and son pairs always have names that, the father's name means friend of God and the son's name means friend of the elves. So Amandil means the friend of God. Elendil means friend of the elves.
Okay.
And so like those are really common, obviously not those names, but those meanings are very common Germanic names. Oh. And there are a lot of like historical, father-son pairs in like the Germanic tribes of Western Europe that have, friend of God, friend of elves,
Interesting.
And
that's really cool. Okay.
Yeah. And so basically this father and son pair, they sort of like, the father sort of makes this wish. And as a result of that, they sort of dream their way back through time, back through these successive generations, all the way to the fall of Numenor. And you find out that they're descended from, refugees from the fall of Numenor. And that's basically that moment is when the Second Age begins to exist in Tolkien's mind, is when he's writing that story, and he never finishes that story, but that's when the Second Age and Numenor, that's when that even becomes like a conception in his head, because he's trying to work out his sort of Atlantis dream, his Atlantis fixation.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So I want to kind of lean into that and show Amandil and Elendil as these kind of like mystical prophetic characters. There's all this stuff that you find in the stories about the fall of Numenor, about like the eagles of Manwë flying overhead and these giant clouds, storm clouds that kind of look like eagles, and like all this different stuff. So I see it as being like very apocalyptic. There's signs, there are portents, like crazy, scary kind of stuff is happening. And
can I pause you for a moment? What does portent mean?
A portent is just like it's like when something happens and you're like, oh, this is a bad omen of something to come. Like a cow is born with two heads, or or there's like a strange weather pattern, or a comet, or things like that.
Yeah.
So I see this as being like the most apocalyptic, mystical season, probably also the darkest season, as we show the development of the death cult, the Morgoth cult on Numenor.
Yes, and
the human sacrifice
people,
and all the stuff that's involved. Yeah, so we just we do it in a tasteful way again, but we can kind of show these things as there's this big buildup of darkness, and so the season ends with the downfall of Numenor, with the breaking of the world, the changing of the world. And so then season 6 is it opens up with Elendil and his sons fleeing the downfall. And the remainder of the season is concerned with the establishment of the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. Sauron recoups in Mordor and attacks and takes Minas Ithil. And this culminates in the March of the Last Alliance. And the great thing about the March of the Last Alliance is that it takes all of our characters of their various lineages, the Noldor, the Sindar, and the Sylvan Elves, the Dwarves, the Numenorian faithful, like all the characters and families that the audience has been following for the last 5 seasons, they all come together at the Last Alliance. That's where Overfear dies, for instance. Thranduil is there. He fights. The dwarves are there. And so season 6 would so basically season 6 is the march, is the setup, the march, the campaign, and the battle.
Okay.
The siege of the Barad-dûr, right? And we can show like the Battle of the Dead Marches, the siege of the Barad-dûr, like we can just show all that stuff. And then season 6 would end where the prologue, Galadriel's prologue to the Lord of the Rings begins, with Isildur cutting the ring from Sauron's hand.
Okay.
And then you could, and if you wanted to tie things into the Jackson films a little bit, right? If you wanted to tie things into the Jackson films a little bit, the very last shot could be, we could show a little bit of the fate of the ring, right? As Isildur cuts it, he's holding it. Isildur stays in the frame, but the background changes, and now he's putting it on as he's about to jump into the river. And he jumps into the river, and he's shot. The ring falls into the mud. We see a hand reaching into the mud and picking it up, and we know that's supposed to be Smeagol. But when the ring is lifted up, it's dark, and it's Bilbo looking through the ring as he's just found the cave. And we can just end right there.
I like that. Because you're not repeating it fully. You're doing jumps.
We just need to sort of show people kind of the continuity.
Yes.
So this is my maybe not super well written or whatever, but this is my pitch.
No, it is. It is. I can, so because of having technical difficulties earlier, it was hard for me to fully commit to be like, I'm just gonna listen. But when I stopped, when I was feeling good about my technical stuff working, and I let it go and just I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just listen to Richard tell a story now. I was enthralled. I was oh my goodness, I could picture it. I could picture it on screen in the same way that I can picture Lord of the Rings. I'm borrowing, of course, from
you're right,
aesthetics.
but we have a shared frame of reference from watching the movies and reading the books and things like that.
Yes, and so I can see, especially it's such a slow burn. It wasn't until the 4th season. Yeah. Of course, the beginning I was like, oh wow, that's interesting, the beginning. But then it is a little like, okay, we've got to get through this. Not in a bad way, but you're like you say, just setup. There's a lot of setup. And I do think, you have the love story stuff. Honestly, that stuff's interesting. We've
got a few different love story things going on. We have kind of little
spurned
bad guys
lovers.
And little battles and things like that to kind of tide us over in the first 3 seasons.
Yeah, it does.
But also set up like sort of different, let's say, shine light from different angles on what evil is in the Legendarium, right?
Yes.
What is it? How does it work? Things like this.
How does it feel?
So that
What's
when
its mood?
Right, so that when Anatar comes along and he's trying to deceive the elves, you believe. This is the irritating thing the showrunner said, is that that no one would ever believe that story. But I think if you set it up right, you can believe, first of all, that Celebrimbor and the other elven smiths are deceived because they so desperately want this to be real. Right. And then also see why the experience and the pain and the wisdom that characters like Elrond and Galadriel have gathered through the things they've been through in their experiences, why that makes them proof against the deception of Anatar.
Why do they see through him when others don't?
Right.
Yes.
And so I think that would be one of the main things I would be tried to focus on, is just to show where's their wisdom coming from. Right. And by the time we get to season 4, we should basically have established that so much that it'll be believable for the audience that Celebrimbor is deceived in this way, because he's been disappointed. He's never really gotten exactly what he wanted.
Yeah,
He's always
been
living in the
short end of
shadow.
stick. Yeah.
Yeah, but also like always living in the shadow of his grandfather's works and never
Yes.
being able to surpass them, and like all these different things. And so when Anatar comes along with that deal, he just desperately wants it to be true.
Yes, because it's not just said, it's shown. Like that's
Right.
the point. And I just like, yeah, season 4, what like that's I would, for me as a fan, I would be waiting with bated breath
Yes.
for Anatar. Like I
Yeah.
like I actually be like, where is it? Like I want to see, like I want to see him realized on film, you know? Like that's I want to see the Numenorians take him captive, pack him back to Numenor. But I see why you need to all these establishing
Because
seasons.
otherwise, when the Numenorians
You
show
wouldn't
up, it'll be
believe
like
it.
it was in Rings of Power. It was just dumb and unbelievable,
Yeah.
and also like didn't feel like it was really important in any way.
No, it wasn't significant. Yes. So I understand the establishing, because it's not like the whole thing is establishing alone. You're right. Like there are things for you to sink your teeth in. But when it comes to, say, the large battles and that bit, it's just because it's seeing the fallen angel, you know, it's seeing
Right. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
seeing the beautiful evil.
Yeah.
But
Visually-
then you see how unbeautiful it is, how ugly
Right.
it ends up being with
Right.
the cult of Morgoth.
Right.
So, like, I love seeing all this art. Sorry, of Anatar. He's
Yes.
so he's like.
They always make him like a sexy
But like,
Anatar.
but like,
Yeah.
but he's evil. Like
Yeah,
know he's
yeah,
evil
yeah,
with this
yeah.
evil smile, but that attractive evil. But it shows like what you're saying about setting up all these different evils and the moods of them and the feeling. You understand why he is evil incarnate, you know, and why those who were deceived because they wanted that thing that he promised.
Yep.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say, you know, and all of this is just kind of like narrative arcs. I think visually, the visual style I would want would be something that uses the best visual parts of the Jackson trilogy. In terms of like kind of the wide sweeping shots, especially as we show the vast scope of distances in Middle Earth. I think that's really important. But I also want a lot of more sort of like visual set pieces that are themselves maybe a little minimal, but like really symbolic. So the weird example that comes to mind that may or may not be relevant for a lot of people, I don't know if you've ever seen Kenneth Branagh's Henry V.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've talked about how you love that.
I adore it. It's
I've
one of my
seen it
favorite
when
movies.
I was a child. Like my mom loved it.
Yeah.
And I remember the tennis balls being given as a present.
Yes.
And I remember like the girl. Oh, and her maid was the witch from
yes.
from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Like I remember my mom telling me all these. Like, oh, so this is what's happening here, and that's why he was given the tennis balls, and that's that one lady from Robin Hood. And but it's been years.
Yeah.
So yes.
So it's worth revisiting because it's got this beautiful artistic style, like the shots. So it's and the reason it's done this way is because it's harkening back to the fact that you're watching a play, right? And so all of the set pieces feel a little bit like a play, and in that sense they're kind of minimalistic, you know, because you know sets for a stage drama, right? Sets have to be fairly minimal because you've got to change them and move them and things like this, and yet. Despite the fact that things are minimal, there might be only 3 or 4 pieces of furniture in the background. Everything is really rich and really beautiful and actually communicates a whole lot about the mood of the scene, about the characters who are in the scene, about the way you're supposed to feel, where you're supposed to situate yourself as the audience. It's just really careful. And I don't know enough about things like set design to tell you what this style would be called. I'm sure somebody who's an expert in this area would be able to tell you. But I would want to use this as opposed to like just like all the CGI and the kind of like bland replaceable like medieval setting of the way that unfortunately a lot of a lot of like the aerial shots of Numenor and Rings of Power I thought were great.
But then the ugly marketplace.
Right, but then you get into the ugly marketplace and it's like this is just a generic medieval marketplace from like any, you know, a slacks and hoodies medieval, you know, movie.
Yeah, from a Ren fair.
Or like not even like a Ren fair. Like there's something like if you go to Ren fair, things look bad, but they look bad in a good way. Like
okay, so you're like not in the fun way.
Not in a not in a fun way, just like
Yeah.
in just like a boring, forgettable way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
instead of doing that, try to use sets that are beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
that communicate the things that they need to communicate. They're in the background, so they're not just in your face, but there's like a richness and a texture to the background that gives kind of a sense of like the depth and of Tolkien's world. It's a little hard. Again, I'm a storyteller. I'm not a set designer.
No,
So
no.
I'm having a hard time describing things in the ways that I'm seeing them in my mind. But
Yeah.
but I think visually, this is another area where like visually it would be very different from the Amazon show that we got.
Well, yes, because you want
And
to establish
green
people and place and who the setting and
Yes.
the props and whatnot and the costuming, and it all helps to establish who these people are,
Right.
which is what Jackson's films did. I
Did a
would
great
say
job. Yeah, I mean,
beautifully.
Weta did such
Yeah.
an amazing job with that stuff, and I would like
You'd
and
hire
again,
Weta then?
for the I mean, for some of the stuff I think they
Why
do.
not?
Yeah, right. Why not?
Why
For
not?
things like the
You have $1
underground
billion.
scenes.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go on.
right. I have $1 billion. For things like the underground scenes and things like this, again, I would want to lean more into almost like a more Guillermo del Toro kind of the way that like in
It's
Labyrinth,
yeah, it's a bit
where-
more
or-
mystical, a little bit more
or
dark.
Pan's Labyrinth, sorry, but
Yeah,
yeah, just
yeah.
like so when you're going into under the earth to deal with this menace, like you're entering into the mythic underworld, right? Just more that kind of sense than
Yeah.
just oh, we're in a cave
it's
fighting
cool.
a troll.
Yeah.
Look, I'm gonna do a flip, and then you put out your sword as a ramp, and I'm gonna run up and cut the troll's head off, and boom, aren't we great? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but instead, like this feeling of you're going into the
No
deep.
conjuring of cheap tricks.
Yes,
is what
no
you're
conjuring.
saying.
Yes, no conjuring of cheap tricks. This idea that you're going into the dark, you're really confronting evil at its most pure, like its most banal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, isn't
so
it
anyway,
the unseen enemy, the unseen
Right.
monster
right,
in film is the most jarring because
right, the most
nothing
terrifying
can
because
actually be better than your imagination
yeah,
in
And so-
in the dark, right?
right, exactly. So I think so some things like this. So I visually, in a lot of ways, it would be a lot more different. It'd be really differentiated from the Rings of Power show.
Yeah.
And even
yes.
from the
Very
Jackson
much so.
trilogy in that sense. Although I really like the Moria sequence in the Fellowship of the Ring,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that was ever really topped as far as like the fantasy genre goes. Like you can't really top a for the lack of a better term, a dungeon crawl on film. Then it doesn't really get better than that whole Moria sequence in the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
So I probably have about maybe
Mhm.
like 10 more minutes till I run out of room again on my computer.
right, yeah.
but we're harkening back to the technical difficulties I mentioned.
Yep.
So I asked you this and I stopped you because I wanted it recorded because I don't know what your answer is. So what would you call this? It could be Rings of Power, but I feel like that doesn't encompass everything. The Second Age. No.
I mean, that's a good question.
Do you want to think about it? Or
Yeah,
do you-
I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer because you've got your focus on so many different things, and yet there's the single through line, right? I think that I don't know if I was going to do it, I would call it something like The Return of the Shadow, or I don't know. I mean, The Rings of Power itself, not a bad title. That comes from that essay at the end of the Silmarillion of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Right. And so the title itself is not bad in as much as the story, unlike whatever Amazon is doing, the story actually culminates in the forging of the Rings of Power and the fallout from that. Whereas Amazon was just like, we'll just forge these Rings of Power just right at the beginning of the show. How about that? So, I mean, I don't dislike the Rings of Power as an overall title for the show. I think I'd almost prefer to give specific titles to seasons, if that makes any kind of sense. This wouldn't work on American television, but it's the sort of thing that the BBC might do, right? Where each season for me would be like its own film series, right? even to the point of like having its own aesthetic, having its own kind of like cinematographical.
Well, they call them series, like series
right,
1,
yeah,
series 2,
yes,
like whereas we usually say season. Yeah.
Right. So like almost each season would be its own mini series in the sense of telling a self-contained story, which then connects to the next season because of these characters who carry on. But from season to season, we might want to have a different mood. And so we would actually, we'd have different people doing the cameras, different kinds of cinematography, different kinds of set design and things like that from season to season. And so the show would actually kind of carry the viewer along with it. And
do you have the names of the different seasons yet?
Not yet. I haven't gone that far.
Well, we'll do more like a brick and mortar sort of casting, like another episode where we do that kind of thing. Well, you could call it the Return of the Shadow.
Yeah.
Or the Return of Shadow, or however it was you said it, for the overarching thing. Yeah.
And the season 4 could be the
Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Lord of the Rings, like they did that for the films,
right?
So there's no reason why we couldn't just do that for the
And so
seasons.
And I guess my final note, as I've been thinking about this today, is that I don't have $1 billion, but I could very easily see. I could very easily see. I'm not a fan fiction writer. Like, it's just, I don't have a problem with other people doing it. It's just not my bag. I've got my own like novels and stuff like that.
You're like, I want to make my own. Yeah.
But I think this could very easily adapt to a truly amazing tabletop campaign that would take years to play out. But it would be just the coolest thing to sit down with a group of people and say, all right, for the next 7 years, we're going to be doing the second age of Middle Earth. We're going to cover.
Oh my goodness! Can you please do it online, and can I please join?
If I can get some time in the schedule, I sometime the next year or two, I may make this a reality, because, the idea of let's, just like to sit down and say, okay, guys, we're going to spend the next decade of our lives, or however long it takes. We're going to play out the second age of Middle Earth. It's going to be 3,441 years of in-game time.
Oh, it's
awesome. People can play men, elves, dwarves, things like this. And at some point you have like multiple campaigns going, because there's like Numenor, adventures in Numenor and adventures in Middle Earth, and like you kind of switch back and forth. And so that's kind of like where my mind does go. I don't have $1 billion, but this would be an amazing, amazing tabletop campaign. So maybe one of these days we will.
I would say Tolkien approved. I'm gonna guess.
I think so.
Because we like the idea of participatory acts in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think it probably would have taken him some adjusting to like a tabletop what now or whatever.
What? Yes.
But the basic idea of tell your own stories, don't let people do it for you, is very much an idea that he approved of. So.
Oh yes. Okay. Yay! Did it? Got it done. I really like where you took it. I wish this is what we were given. That is my wish.
Me too. Me too.
Like, why didn't they come a-knocking? Amazon, good things come to those who wait, and bad things come to those who don't wait. Like, it really is a matter of that being willing to set up. And we saw this in reverse, and I know you didn't watch I don't know if you watched much of Game of Thrones, but it reversed. It started off really strong, and then they didn't have the patience or the source material to end it properly, and it just was absolute not good stuff. But then when they did the House of the Dragon, everyone was so surprised that it was good, because we all thought it would be horrible.
Yeah, I think everyone assumed it was gonna suck.
Anyways,
and
then sorry, the point being, you need to earn the payoffs, and the payoffs need to be earned on both sides, beginning, middle, and end. Everything needs to be done at the utmost, or it falls apart.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Yeah. So that's our closing thoughts.
What you should do is, once you post this, we'll share it in Christ and Tolkien and the other groups, and ask the audience for their casting suggestions.
Ooh, that'd be good.
I don't know a lot of, like, I watch things and things like this, but I'm not one of these people who just like knows actors.
Not
and
super
is like
current. Yeah.
And so But it would be really cool to kind of like get suggestions from the audience for main characters. Main characters being our core cast of elves, right? Galadriel, Celeborn, Elrond, Celebrian, Celebrimbor, and maybe, and then the Sylvan elves, Thranduil and Orophyr. Like, get our core cast of elves, because these are this is cast that's not going to change.
Yeah.
And then cast like other prominent humans, dwarves, things like that as the timeline progresses. So the other thing that I feel like this pitch is missing, I guess I would say, is that I haven't really thought a whole lot about the Moria story arc. I like there being, and I have a couple of things, let's say, tentatively in mind. For instance, Tolkien has the reason that Celeborn didn't go through Moria. He has the reason as like this sort of antipathy towards dwarves, and so he just doesn't want to go that direction, and so they get separated. And I'm not totally satisfied with that, but I think that you could do something with
something could have happened.
You could do something with, like, Celeborn has a major falling out with one of the Dwarven leaders over his memory of the dwarves sacking Doriath.
Yeah, because that is a thing, very much so.
Which is why he doesn't like dwarves. So he has a falling out, but then when he has that falling out, later on, the dwarves are like, when stuff is going down in Eregion and they need to get away, the dwarves like Galadriel because she's been a good friend to them. They'll say, you and your daughter are welcome, but he's not. And so then Celeborn is like, that's fine, I'm going to stay and fight, or something like that. So there's just some things, like, I would like to work more into this outline about what is happening in Moria. It's obviously really important at this particular time. But I just haven't like really sat down and thought a ton about it. I don't like the mithril story arc that they ended up going with in Rings of Power. So for a variety of reasons, like not just on this stupid, like, elves are, battery powered angle, but also just like the dynastic struggle that they're trying to set up, I felt wasn't hugely convincing. And so I'd like to maybe go some other direction with that, but I have to think about that some more.
Well, that's fine, and you have all the time in the world that you
right. I know it's my fake $1 billion, so I can do what I want.
Well,
with it.
I do. I like doing thought experiments like this. There's a YouTuber I watch called The Critical Drinker, and he does fixing. I mean, they're 10-minute, 15, 20-minute segments. Right. Yeah. But I think he does this. He fixes films.
Those are pretty good things to watch from a perspective, just trying to learn storycraft, like how to write a good story.
What could have been switched a little.
Right. Why are bad stories bad, and how would you fix them? If you're somebody who's engaged in storytelling, that's something you have to care about.
Yes. I appreciate that you came on. Thank you so much for.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
No, this is giving me a lot of like closure that I was needing.
Well, very good. Maybe one of these days we'll game it out.
Please, yes, I'm there. I mean, if you're willing to do online,
I run online games all the time, so
okay. Then
maybe one of these days we'll be able to make that happen.
I'll get my cape, like it is upstairs in my closet.
Of course it is.
Of course it is.
Of course it is.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Thanks, Andrea.
Recording.